There's a real emotional appeal. Like, we have a rain dance. It's great. We do implicit bias training, and then we celebrate because we did the rain dance, and now we have some control, and things are going to get better.
Oh, wow. Hunter, that's brilliant. I love that. No, it's doing a rain dance. You're right. A lot of diversity training is doing a rain dance.
Yeah, so we're ready. So we have the great Jonathan Haidt here, Professor Jonathan Haidt out of Columbia University. I think I can call you a moral psychologist.
Wait, I'm at New York University, not Columbia.
Yeah, that's right. New York. Same thing. It's all in New York, bro. You're all liberals.
and actually, you should say the Stern School of Business, because it's
the Stern
Maine University.
And so already, Bryan, he's challenging your moral intuition because you think that he's a liberal academic professor, but then he's at a business school. So where does he fit within your free market libertarian value system?
I don't put him. He's changed my point of view, and so and even on how I define myself. So I'm not categorizing Jonathan Haidt at all here. I will say that I want to thank you, first of all, because my last comedy special, Complicated Apes, which is what I call it, which is what I think we are, was very much influenced by your thinking, your books, and I don't think I could have done it without you. And my ratings are, I just did this, it's done very well, and so you are owed a debt of gratitude. So thank you for your ideas and for putting together a lot of other ideas and making sense of the world for us. So that's the first thing I want to say.
You're too kind. My pleasure. I
want to talk. I really am intrigued by, first of all, the Coddling of the American Mind, very important book, especially for now. But I think all of your books tie into a larger narrative, and I notice that there seems to be this war between, the rationalists and people of faith, people who are, for lack of a better word, but I'll use your word, people who are intuitionists. Mm-hmm. And you're an intuitionist. And I think you do a very, very good job of kind of describing, you come up with these crazy stories in The Righteous Mind, for example, cutting up an American flag. Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, I came up with as I was reading it. I remember I thought, well, having sex with the chicken and then eating it afterwards, if nobody gets hurt, or a brother and sister in the woods having sex with birth control and with a condom, and no one knows about it, is that wrong? Well, again, people who are educated are like, well, it all depends. People like myself are like, it's wrong. I can't tell you why. I just know it when I see it, right? So, and then I kind of said, what if you cut up the American flag? And actually, I said, what if you use the American flag to clean your bathroom? And so I feel like I have a little bit of your mind. I came up with that, but the point is that you do a very good job of kind of describing how there are certain things that we have an intuition about, whether they're hardwired or whatever they are, that we have to take into account. And you make this amazing call for looking at human beings as these complicated people, complicated organisms, mm-hmm. who have 5 moral foundations. And I thought maybe we could start with that.
Sure.
To help us kind of bridge a gap between people like, for example, Sam Harris, who I admire very much. But I remember you said on his podcast, Sam, you're a rationalist, I'm an intuitionist. I think that's what you said.
Yep. Yeah.
Have you, where is the sticking point with you guys, with people like that? Where is the...
Yeah, so let's start with intuitionism versus rationalism, and then we'll get into the specific foundations. So there is there's a long debate in Western philosophy as to whether morality is about reasoning, and Plato said that the mind is divided into parts like a charioteer guiding a chariot, and reason is the charioteer, and the 2 horses are the passions, the noble passions and the base or low passions. And so Plato gave us this image in the Phaedrus, in one of his dialogues, that a man must study philosophy and learn to control his impulses, and then he will have a well-ordered soul. And if he can do that, then when he dies, he will not come back. He will not be reborn into this world. His soul will, be reincarnated or will go up to the heavens, which is pure rationality. So a lot of societies have noted that the heavens seem ordered and calm and majestic, and this earth is just full of conflict and violence and unpredictability and dirt and chaos and sex. And so this idea of a degraded human existence and a lofty divine existence, this is something that's really interested me in my whole academic career. whenever you find common ideas that are common around the world on continents that didn't talk to each other, well, either it comes out of we all have the same experience with our bodies, which is possible, or the cooler thing is, what if there are these unconscious ideas? Carl Jung talked about this, of course. The collective consciousness, he called it, and he got kind of mystical about it. But many of us who study evolution, we love these cool ideas like, why do so many cultures have dragons? There are no dragons in the world. And one interesting hypothesis is that because mammals coexisted with dinosaurs for a while, humans didn't, but there were mammals coexisting with dinosaurs for a long time. So there may be neural systems that recognize dragon-like features and they come all the way down to us. Now, I have no idea if this is true. I'm just giving it as an example of like a really cool idea that there could be all kinds of stuff in our heads. All right, so some people are rationalists and they think, well, morality, we should be able to figure out from first principles. What are the first principles? Well, either it's harm, like don't cause harm, or it's you have rights, I respect you, you respect me. And then you go out from that.
We get more out of that, right? So fair play and give and take is a better way to organize a society, and ultimately there's more for everybody. And so that should point the way to behaving morally is rational, right?
That's right. And so there's this something about academics especially, is they think there's some special honor in explaining everything with one principle. And so, it's like, can we explain all of morality with just reciprocity and turn-taking? Like from that, we could discover everything. And if I can do that, then I get the prize. I get the prize for having cracked this, the puzzle with a single principle. And then there are others that no, it's a single principle, but that principle is harm, and then we can deduce everything from there. And I say, a pox on both your houses. Evolution, look, we're products of evolution, and evolution did not give a damn about parsimony. Evolution did not say what's the most efficient way to create a brain. Like it's just stuff builds on stuff, and it's a mess. Richard Dawkins uses the example that there's some nerve. I might be getting the details wrong, but the gist of it, there's a nerve in giraffes which goes down all the way down the neck and then back up. It makes this huge loop, and it goes 20 feet out of its way. Well, because evolution laid that loop down back when the neck was this big. And as the giraffe neck got bigger and bigger and bigger, the neuron had to stretch. It's incredibly inefficient, but that's just what evolution did. And so this is my view about morality, that we are interesting apes, we are complicated apes, we have the software in our heads for being successful as apes, and a lot of that's just messy, weird stuff. So a lot of our stuff about primates. Oh, for example, okay, so humans at the end of a wrestling match, how do you show that you give up? Right? Don't you slap the ground or something?
You tap, yeah. Well, you tap, yeah.
You tap, right? Other apes do that too. So there's something that we have all kinds of software in our heads for conflict and resolution of conflict. So I just find that so much more interesting to do, kind of like archaeology. It's like digging through a basement that is full of junk, rather than saying...
and to jump on, to piggyback that, as you get older, you realize that a huge part of being human is holding contradictory values.
Yeah, exactly.
Mercy and compassion versus justice and fair play. I do this joke in my last special where I believe in borders, but I'd be a shitty border control agent. I'm just too emotional. I'd be like, nobody comes across legal, and I'd be like, they have the kids. Oh shit, come on, it's so it's hard to be consistent. It'd be hard, right? I mean, so we all. Yeah.
Exactly. So some people have this disease, which is they need to be consistent and parsimonious, whereas true morality requires wisdom, and wisdom requires nuance. It requires balancing competing principles, competing interests. There can be general principles, but there are often exceptions. And this is why we still have judges, and we will have judges 100 years from now, even when AI gets very smart, because you can't just have a few principles and then rank them by, it does require an enormous amount of experience and wisdom.
Well, also one of your colleagues, I think, did a study on moral psychologists and moral philosophers and scientists, and they weren't any more ethical. People who really go down the rabbit hole of ethics and study it and write books about it, they didn't clean up after themselves. They didn't call their mothers any more than anybody else. They didn't do anything that was considered moral or ethically. They weren't better than a guy like me. I mean, the mean aggregate.
That's right. That's right. Studying morality, studying morality does not make you more ethical. Knowing more about it doesn't. And that fits in with the metaphor that I hit on when I was writing my first book, the happiness hypothesis, was that the mind is divided, not the way Plato said, with a charioteer controlling two horses. It's divided like a rider on an elephant, like a little boy on the back of a gigantic elephant, because I wanted a creature that was much bigger than a horse, much smarter than a horse. And I very well might have ripped off the metaphor from Buddha. I found out years later Buddha talks this way, and I'd read Buddha in college, so maybe I got it from Buddha. I don't know, but
it belongs to Haidt. It's a Haidt Buddha. It's a Haidt Buddha hyphen.
I'm very happy to have that.
Yes, Siddhartha. I call you Siddhartha Haidt.
Yeah. We're pretty sure you're the Buddha's reincarnation as well. Right. So
stop, guys.
Stop it! For God's sake, he's just a professor at the Stern School of Business. Keep going.
Who has all the signs of the Buddha?
Yeah.
Except the belly, thank God. Okay, but the great thing about this metaphor, when you see it this way, where the elephant is most of what's going on in your head, the elephant is very smart. It can't do what a person can do. It's smart in a different way. Now you can understand this wonderful quote from Ovid. I forget which work, but he says, there's a line from one of his plays. He says, "I see the right way and approve it. Alas, I follow the wrong." And once you understand that our mental architecture is a rider on an elephant, not a rationalist controlling horses, then you can see why it just so often happens that way.
But you're also bucking Western tradition. I mean, I grew up with a father, and God bless him, and who I admire and everything, but he was raised in, I mean, Plato and Socrates were the philosophers, and everyone else is a footnote.
Right.
And so meaning the body should be treated with a quiet contempt. At the end of the day, you should realize that this is just sort of rusty machinery that the brain. And emotions are not only a weakness, but the man who can control his emotions with iron will is the man of great character. The Greeks, for God's sake, define character in two words: self-control. And in a long, I mean, to an extent, I want you to see if there's pushback on that. But I wish somebody had told me, hey, listen, man, it's perfectly normal to have this elephant, because you choose an elephant, I think, because there is something about cognitive emotion. Emotion's not dumb. Emotion is, it's not just
it's often
fire.
Wrong, but it's pretty intelligent, but they often make terrible mistakes. And we'll get to that later with the coddling the American mind.
Yes.
But yeah, emotions contain a lot of evolved wisdom. But to go back to the philosophical tradition, the Greek tradition especially is very varied. And you have these, rationalist, self-control. But you also have the Epicureans, you have the Cynics, you have all kinds of different schools, some of which loved sex and food and the senses and believed it. So the Greek tradition has all this different variety in it, and then it kind of like gets, and it influences the Roman tradition, which is that's a little more, self-control. But then we lose a lot of the texts, and then they're recovered, translated through by Arabic scholars, and the Catholic Church brings them back in. Well, a Christian tradition is going to not draw on everything. They're going to really favor some things that fit with the Christian worldview, which involves, self-abnegation, mortification of the flesh. So the Greek tradition is really quite varied, and the Western philosophical tradition is also varied, although you're right that like the mainstream is this line back to the rationalist. And
Jonathan, what I also mean is it seems that the ideas that seem to have held to this day are those that favored restriction of the flesh. I mean, the entire Judeo-Christian ethic, Islam, Socrates, Aristotle, it wasn't, correct me again if I'm wrong, it was Nietzsche who came along and said, well, look, man, you guys are born camels, shrug all that bullshit off, become a lion, live wild, leave a good-looking corpse, die young and leave a good-looking corpse almost, right? Yeah. I mean...
Well, that's right. Okay, but right, so there you go. So you in every age, you might have a dominant view of how to live, but then you've always got people who rebel against it, and so I think the classic divide. It's even called the Apollonian versus the Dionysian, and so Apollo is the god of order. And again, if there are any classic scholars here, I don't really know what I'm talking about. I'm remembering my college philosophy classes here.
You're right on this, though.
The gist of this is probably more or less right, but but I think it was Nietzsche who also noticed this. There's the Apollonian versus the Dionysian character. So the Greeks also had this Dionysian tradition. Dionysus, the god of drunkenness and grapes and celebration. And so in each age, you have, because you have people of different personalities. So you have some people who say, this is bullshit. I don't, to hell with you. I'm doing the opposite. And so for me, what was very important was David Hume in the 18th century, the famous Scottish philosopher, pushing back against the rationalists and saying, this whole line is completely wrong. You got the wrong psychology. And he says, most famously, reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions and can never pretend to any other office than to serve and obey them. And so that's what I read in grad school after I'd majored in philosophy as an undergrad. And I said, holy cow, this is right. Like, this guy is a psychologist. And so we got to keep in mind, the philosophers are trying to say, like, what is right? The psychologists are saying, how do we work? What do we think is right? And part of what I've been trying to argue is there's no point in doing that normative thing, like what should we do? There's no point in even really talking about that until you have a good sense of who we are, how we work, what's possible, why we judge something's wrong and right. So I think you really have to have a good solid moral psychology before you can do the philosophical reflection.
Well, and isn't the irony of all of this that the rationalist point of view is emotionally appealing to philosophers?
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Yes. That's and that's sort of the crux of my debate with Sam Harris. So with Sam, my relationship with him is really interesting because I have very few enemies, but for a couple of years, Sam was like one of my only enemies. We were really on the outs, and then we made up, and I think we really like each other, and I certainly respect the hell out of him for his guts and his breadth.
Me too.
But Sam, Sam was really one of the most influential of the new atheists. And the new atheists, at least my reading of them, was this is a bunch of guys who love science and who have turned it into a kind of a religion and act as though reasoning is this amazing sacred thing. And anytime you're acting like something is sacred and you're denying the evidence that it's flawed, you're treating it like a god. And so that was the crux of my debate with Sam. And that's when this battle between the rationalists like Sam and Richard Dawkins and Dan Dennett and well, they all believe in, they're all evolutionists too. So they're not oversimplifiers, but they put a lot of faith in the power of reason. And I was much more in the David Hume tradition saying, reason all you want.
Sam's a complicated case because Sam's also a Buddhist. I mean, Sam's also a guy who really is fascinated with the idea of circumventing this entire debate, which is, being mindful enough to experience your emotions. In fact, I think Sam's obsessed with taming the elephant. Maybe all of us are, but Sam's obsessed with taming the elephant, probably in a sense. Yeah. I don't know Sam, but I mean, obsessed with the idea that there is a way to tame that elephant, which would be the Buddhist idea of mindfulness, Dzogchen meditation, or whatever it is. And I think that's a whole different discipline and subject, but it's something, he's very complicated. For an atheist, he's a hell of a Buddhist. It's pretty amazing.
Most Buddhists, it seems, are either atheists or Jews. I mean, I'm Jewish, and it's like, if you grow up with a religion like Judaism, which there's all these ethical teachings, but the God part is not necessarily so central. So it just seems like a lot of leading American Buddhists are Jews or certainly atheists.
Did Sam read your books? Do you know?
I think, he definitely read The Righteous Mind. That one I know he read.
Well, I would be surprised at his pushback on that book. Like, I don't know.
Well, no, because so Sam. So the reason it came to a head. So Sam and I had there was a. What was it called? Beyond Belief. There was this set of conferences around 2007, 2008 out in La Jolla, California. And Sam and Richard Dawkins, a bunch of them were at the first one in maybe 2007. And then I was invited to the second one, and Sam was there too. And we debated about religion, because I think that religion is a product of evolution. It ends up doing a lot of good, a lot of harm. I try to take a nuanced view of it. And those other guys are like, no, it's evil. We need to just rip it out. And I don't think you can just rip it out. And in fact, if you rip it out, because it's in your brain's going to make other stuff into gods. Yes, was my charge. So like ideologies. That's example, Jordan Peterson's argument about that.
Well, but also
communism,
for fascism. Example, ironically, like the new atheists, you ripped out all that religion, and then they turned science into a god.
Yeah. Exactly.
So.
Yeah, no, go ahead. That's it.
But I mean, I think that's the whole thing is, I mean, for me, a lot of what this comes down to is, as you said, like, we can have these fantasies about human nature, But the first step, and it's not that being wishful for what a society might look like isn't helpful, but it's a question of sequencing. Do you first do the work of understanding how is human nature actually, and then be wishful about how you might create a better society? Or are you wishful about human nature and then spend your time rationalizing away how humans actually behave?
That's right. We have a lot of experience as a species with societies that try to create a utopia based on a flawed model of human nature. And it's just a question of how many millions or tens of millions they end up killing or imprisoning.
Well, that's the scariest part. And by the way, I don't want to beat up on Sam because I've listened to a lot of him and a lot of him speak. I think he's way more nuanced. I think if we had him here, he would be open to a lot of your arguments.
No, I agree. I agree.
Yeah,
and he really, he changes and grows. Like, he reads, talks to a lot of people. He does change and grow. I respect that.
But this is all a process of figuring these things out. These are. I think that's the fun of this. The fun of having these conversations and reading these books is being open to. I mean, I'm so amazed at 52 years old that so much of my belief system was given to me by a Christian Marine. I mean, my father's an atheist actually, but he went to the seminary and the idea of the free market, the idea of personal responsibility, the idea of God, guts, and guns. I'm really simplifying my father, but these were the things that he didn't escape from, and I haven't escaped from either. When you talk about socialism to me, I immediately go, well, wait a minute. This guy wants to take away money from people who've earned it. This communist. I mean, I get nervous. I get very scared, and so it's amazing how much of my elephant was given to me. I mean, some of these ideas that I identify with were given to me, and I'm defending, as you say. I thought this was fascinating too. I don't vote, and most people don't vote out of self-interest. We vote for our team. We vote for a team. Yeah. And I think we go to war over that. If you want to get young men to go to war, you get them behind slogans. You get them behind a soundbite, a philosophy they can really, right? I mean, I think that's to an extent. I don't know.
I mean, it depends on the war.
Yeah,
certainly. But I think the research shows that ideology and patriotism and things like that often explain part of why people are willing to go to war. Although why they are willing to risk their lives and face bullets and face high odds of death on the ground tends to be for their buddies. It tends to be for the small group on the ground. Yes, as just what I read about that.
Let's go to Coddling of the American Mind. So the happiness hypothesis, you wrote that 12 years ago. A huge book for us, and how as we were starting to. I mean, Hunter, you had this sort of conversion where you had
quite literally. I mean, I had.
But honestly, talk about it because it's relevant.
Because you used to be a small girl, and then you were converted into a large man.
He certainly
with
was.
the power of testosterone.
That's right,
free
a big
testosterone.
Dutchman. Yeah.
No, I was actually funny. I was visiting my parents in Libya, and because my dad was working there, and this was before Gaddafi had fallen, before the Arab Spring, and I'd gone through. I mean, I understand the rationalist perspective. Like, it is a single variable explanation. It's really exciting. It provides. I grew up all over the world like Bryan, and so there was a moral simplicity, the idea that science would save us. That was my soteriology. And then I'd worked for Jim Watson at Cold Spring Harbor and met my hero and found him to be racist, sexist, small-minded, and, oh, the mighty, but their feet are made of clay. And so there was this profound experience of really losing my religion. And then, was trying to find, some sort of worldview that could make sense of our shared humanity, but also make sense of our cultural differences. And the happiness hypothesis for me, like, honestly, it was the first time that I was like, holy shit, like, we can find value in ancient traditions and also find value in science to illuminate those old insights. And there might be some sort of synthesis that's possible here where we could all come to the table and learn from each other's perspectives.
Yeah, I think you said Christ was the first neuroscientist.
Well, and I mean, it honestly, it feels like that, because to me, the experience of reading your book was, I think, often there's this sort of naive, immature relationship with science where you think that essentially all the old ways were worthless. It was, there were plagues, there were pestilence. It was literally the dark ages. And then, to realize that in many senses, what we've done is to reinvent the wheel. And there's nothing wrong with reinventing the wheel because, the wheel gets better. And that's really what your book showed me is that, a lot of what the psychology has come to is we have reinvented the wheel, but we're reinventing it better. The old wheel was a cartwheel. We now have like a pneumatic tire.
Yeah, I think it's so. First of all, you gotta either patent or trademark that. What Christ was the first neuroscientist, and then so that makes religion look better, and then the scientific heroes with feet of clay makes science look a little bit worse. And that's reasonable. I mean, that they both have their strengths, they both have their flaws. I think it's helpful to distinguish between sort of the natural sciences and especially technology, which does improve constantly and measurably from decade to decade. And then there's the sciences that are, well, certainly the social sciences, but even some of the biological sciences where it's probabilistic and you have to use statistics to figure out, well, was there an effect or not? So I'm really struck by how it's not just psychology and other social sciences that are having this replication crisis, where a lot of our published studies turn out not to replicate. You even have it in cancer research, a lot of biomedical research, genetic research. So it's not necessarily hard versus soft sciences, although it's more common in the soft sciences. But that science is much harder than people realize. Like technology is not. Technology, of course, it's hard. You have to be smart. But like technology, because it's so clear, either this worked or it didn't work. And if it didn't work, we change it and then it works. Like, so in a sense, technology is easy. It just moves ahead. I mean, again, what Elon Musk does and what those guys do is incredible, but it has to march. It does march ahead. Understanding. So here's the thing I'm thinking a lot about these days. In my field, social psychology, like probably the biggest thing that we study is racism, and we have a lot of research on diversity and racism and how do you reduce racism, and huge amounts of research on diversity training and experiments that would reduce racism. And when Starbucks had an ugly racial episode in a Philadelphia store last year, what did they do? They closed down all their stores and they gave everybody implicit bias training. So it was a big gesture, a very expensive gesture, but there's no evidence that implicit bias training actually works to improve the climate. There's no evidence that it works to have any beneficial effect on actual behavior, on people's experience. And if you think about that, it's kind of stunning that after 40 years of research, social science has nothing to offer. We have no program where we can say, do this, this works. So how does that happen? How can that possibly happen? And my view is that there are certain research communities in which something is proposed, it's properly vetted because people are willing to critique it, and then it's properly tested, and if it fails, we know it failed. That's great. That's how it should work. But in politicized areas, in areas that are we're deeply moralistic, we're religious about race and gender and other issues, in those areas, someone proposes something, and if someone thinks it's a bad idea, they may not say it. They may just bite their tongue, and everyone's going to say, oh, that's great. Oh, yes. So I think in politicized areas of the social sciences in particular, we don't have the proper breadth of ideas to begin with. When ideas are proposed, we don't have the proper vetting of them. When studies are done, we lower the standard, we lower the bar if it gets a conclusion that we like, and we raise the bar if it gets a conclusion we don't like. There's a lot of research showing this. And therefore, the social sciences are not cumulative. They don't march ahead in the way that they do in technology. And so this is something I'm hoping we can change because the social sciences are essential in the 21st century. It's funny,
Jonathan, because a lot of people agree with that. I mean, when I say he's a sociologist, you say that to my parents, they'll roll their eyes.
Yeah.
You know why? Because they go, they're always wrong. There'll be somebody will come along and prove them to be. This is what happens, and so you're dead on. There's
also I think the other thing is it ties into your work on religion, because having a rain dance is better than having nothing.
Yeah.
And there's a real emotional appeal. Like, we have a rain dance, it's great. We do implicit bias training, and then we celebrate because we did the rain dance, and now we have some control, and things are going to get better.
Oh wow, Hunter, that's brilliant. I love that. No, it's doing a rain dance. You're right. A lot of diversity training is doing a rain dance. Wow.
I mean, sexual harassment, we always have these meetings I do this TV show, hashtag celebrity, and but I'm sure you watch the Goldbergs and schooled all the time, John.
Although that was actually one of the funniest things. So do you know Cesar Hidalgo at MIT?
Oh, yeah, I think I do. I think I've met him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we interviewed Cesar Hidalgo, who, again, brilliant, physicist and economist at MIT, We're setting up for the interview. He's like, I don't have any idea who this interview is. Bryan walks in, and he's like, Coach Meller is interviewing me from the Goldbergs?
I know. Nothing like a sitcom.
Yeah, well, different stage hierarchies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
yeah.
I know. I'm a broad actor. But, what was the point I was making about? I'm sorry.
Oh, the rain dance.
Oh, no, yeah, and the sensitivity training,
and so we always have sexual harassment, and everybody sits, men and women, and we go, this is a formality that all of us are going to have to sit through, and everybody rolls their eyes, and I'm always amazed that somebody said we have to do something, and that is an amazing metaphor. It is a rain dance because at least we're shown to care, so we'll do a ritual. It's almost like a talisman. We're gonna do this ritual to keep the evil spirits away. It's about as effective. It really is.
Wait, hold on. I think there's a flaw in the metaphor. So a rain dance is a ritual. Rituals are done to bind a community together.
Yes.
And so while a rain dance doesn't produce rain, it does produce greater group cohesion, greater trust. So a lot of the righteous mind draws on Emil Durkheim, the sociologist, who analyzed the social functions of religion and ritual. Mm-hmm. So if it was a rain dance, it would work to bring us together. However, the research on diversity training shows that in general, it has no positive effect. But more importantly, because it is often done in a blaming way. Anytime you're saying, we're all going to come together for this ritual in which we all blame the white men, the older white men, they're the cause of the problems, they're privileged, everyone has to confess their privilege. People sit through it with gritted teeth. When it's done in that way, it makes things worse because if you blame people, they tend to turn against you. You can't shame people into agreeing with you.
Especially if they're fair-minded. Especially if they agree with the idea that the world should be more.
But it's also the other problem with rituals is they become attenuated. So we go to church, it brings us together, but 40, 50 years on, it's like we resent the shit out of the fact that we have to sit in church.
I think people realize it's not honest, and it's not taking into account how complicated we are, and it goes back to your 5 moral foundations.
But it's also to go back to the earlier point, it's also the fact that it's not grounded in the reality of who we are. My big problem with all of this training has always been the Dunbar number. We literally can't conceptualize 7 billion individuals as unique, special snowflakes and individuals. We have to have these broad caricatures and stereotypes. But what we can do is be aware that they are stereotypes, think critically about what are they based on, and then be able to question and reflect on them. And again, like you talk about in the coddling of the American mind, if we started having a conversation about the shared problem of the Dunbar number, then we're drawing that big circle humanity, identity politics, because we all have this shared problem. How are we going to manage it together?
Yeah, that's right. That's the attitude that I think would work. That we all have this shared problem. How are we going to manage it together? And so the thing I'm thinking a lot about these days is how can we demoralize problems? And I don't mean demoralize I'm demoralized, but I mean rip the morality out of it and just see it as almost an engineering problem. And so, for example, with any kind of diversity training issue, the thing that makes it also complicated is that the biggest single cause of stereotypes is people's perceptions of covariance patterns in their social world. Mm-hmm. And if we can't say that, and I'm only saying it obliquely and indirectly because I can't really say it out loud either.
What do you mean by covariance?
People notice what predicts what. And that's true for neural systems. That's true for animals. It's true for sea slugs. Or
pattern recognition.
Yeah. So, if we're trying to root out stereotypes, and the biggest single cause of stereotypes is that there are observable differences in the social world. So this is research by Lee Jussum and others on what's called stereotype accuracy. And so if we can't really talk about it, then we have to be focused on these little things that don't really matter, and we don't really get anywhere. And so what I just said would be sacrilege in many quarters. So let me just expand on it. and dig myself deeper and say that the approach I'm trying to develop, what I'm thinking about is there some way that we could like meet in a closed room with no media and no risk of shame, a bunch of people who are committed to actually solving this problem, and try to figure out what would work. Let's just agree, where that little house between North Korea and South Korea. Maybe we should meet there, and have people who are willing to let's look at all the explanations and even why people hold stereotypes. Like the fact that people hold stereotypes doesn't make them bad people. It means that they have brains that notice covariance patterns.
I do this. Look, I mean, in my Special Complicated Apes, I literally say, I'm not racist, but I make racial assumptions. I've done this joke in front of, I don't know, probably 10,000, 20,000 people altogether. And they all laugh. I'll say something like, I do discriminate against somebody by the way they look. I don't care if you give all your money to charity or you won Citizen of the Year. If you have a face tattoo, you are never, ever babysitting my kids. That's never happening. Yeah. And then I even go further and I talk about how I do this joke where I say I have some assumptions that don't make it. I don't know where they got them, but I said I believe that most black men don't own cats, and black men just laugh. And then I go, and here's another assumption: if you are a black man and you own cats, you're gay, and the whole crowd, white, black, everybody, because I have a pretty diverse audience, they laugh their ass off. Yeah. It's not offensive. It's just it's a something that happened where there was a pattern recognition, And I do that with white people. I do, and so. I think that the reason they laugh is because it's true. And they laugh because they can't say that when they work at Google or Netflix or at their corporation, because they'll get fired or at least be brought up at HR. You can't say that as a professor.
No, that's right.
And this is probably why, which brings us to the coddling of the American mind. What got you to write this book? It's an important book. What got you to write this book? And Rogan, sure. By the way, Rogan is Joe Rogan read this book and loves it. I don't know if he gave you a note about it, but we were talking about it. So
okay, yeah, no, I know he's referred to it a number of times since, and when he does, boom, the numbers go through the roof.
They should. It's an very important book. They should. Yeah. Keep going. Yeah.
So what happened was that in the academic year 2013-2014, in the spring semester 2014, I began to notice some weird things. Students were reacting in some strange ways, taking offense very easily. In one case, I was explaining the Milgram Experiment, the famous Stanley Milgram Experiment, where people are willing to give shocks to someone who they think, as far as they can tell, this person is now dead. It was a study of obedience, and it helps explain the high levels of obedience in the Holocaust. And I was reported to the dean of my school for being insensitive to Jews, because I was basically saying that the Nazis weren't evil, they were just normal people. And, Milgram was Jewish, I'm Jewish. In fact, wait a sec. This was an attempt to demoralize obedience. Like, obedience is a thing that people do. And so I was trying to demoralize it, but it's very hard to demoralize the Holocaust for understandable reasons. And so a student got very upset and emailed the dean to complain about me. So there's a couple of things like that happening all of a sudden. Like, I'd never seen this stuff before. I've been teaching for 15, 20 years at that point, more than 20 years at that point. And so then in May of 2014, Greg Lukianoff came to talk to me. He's the president of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, and he runs he runs FIRE, and had begun seeing students engaging in exactly the same cognitive distortions that he had learned to stop doing when he got treatment for suicidal depression in 2007. He learned CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So when Greg came to me and said, students are catastrophizing, they're mind reading, they're overgeneralizing, they're doing all these cognitive distortions, I said, oh my God, yes, I saw that in the way these students talked about words as being dangerous to them. And so Greg had this idea, and I thought it was the best idea I'd seen in years. And I said, you should write this up for the Atlantic or something. Oh, and I'd be happy to join you if you want to have a co-author. I think it's such a good idea. And he'd come to talk to me because he needed a psychologist to really do this thing. And so we did it, and it got into the Atlantic, and it did really well. It really hit a nerve. Like, people were beginning to see this. But a lot of people said at the time, oh, come on, this is just a bunch of anecdotes from a few campuses. This isn't a real thing. Well, that was August of 2015. Halloween of 2015, everything blew up. So beginning with the protests at Yale, that spread to more than 100 campuses, students demanding protection from words, speakers, ideas, this new set of ideas. Words are violence, and if your words are violence, then I'm justified in using violence to stop you from saying your violent words. So it was like this new moral matrix, this new moral pattern. It didn't just begin at Yale. It was other. But the Yale, when Peter Salovey validated it, when he didn't challenge any aspect of it, he validated. He said, "Here's $50 million to do diversity, for more diversity hires." When he validated it, that I think helped it spread very rapidly. It became the new normal, especially in elite or liberal arts colleges. So that's the origin of the idea and the article. And because it spread so much since then, and because Greg and I have learned so much since then, Greg came to me just before the 2016 election and said, "Jon, I think we need to turn this into a book." And I said, "I'm too busy. I've got another book that's long overdue because of my collaboration with you, you bastard." No, but
yeah.
So I realized he's right. We do need to turn this into a book because there's so much more to know. And at the time, Gen Z, so this is the big thing that we didn't understand. Gen Z is kids born in 1996 or later. When we were writing our article, people thought that college students were millennials. We didn't know it then in 2015. They're not millennials. There's a really sharp generational cutoff. And Gen Z was raised differently. Their social life migrated onto social media between 2009 and 2011. So they got social media in middle school, a lot of them. And that seems to have really changed them. The millennials didn't get social media till college. Facebook originally was just for college students. So anyway, that's the backstory, and that's how this book came to be. And now it's really clear, now that Gen Z has begun graduating from college in 2018, it's really clear that they're taking this new mindset into many organizations, into many companies in media and technology, journalism, the arts. So
yeah, it's incredible. I mean, this woman asked Quentin Tarantino from the New York Times. The New York Times has lost me, man. But this journalist / activist asks Quentin Tarantino, Margot Robbie, she's a great actress, and you didn't give her a lot of speaking lines. Can you talk about that? He just went, "Yeah, I reject your hypothesis. Like, you don't know what it's like to make a movie, you activist. Like, this stuff is beyond fair. It's become a religion." And I think your book does a great job in sort of, I think, tracing the genealogy of this. Helicopter parents, kids start disappearing in the 80s. We are watching everything they do. Kids have very, very little free time. Adults always jump in and stop bullying and all these things that used to be done by kids on their own. Now you've got lawnmower parents, not even helicopter parents anymore. They get rid of all obstacles. And but I like that you've created the heterodox university. I don't know how that's going, but do you think, and do you see, since your book and since a lot of these ideas are hitting the mainstream, do you think, and do you see these things getting better? Because I can tell you, as a comic, we're all making fun of this bullshit. Yeah. We're making fun of this insanity. And once comics start making fun of it, man, even kids, like my friend's son is 15 years old, and he goes to school in Santa Monica, very liberal, private school. And he said, "Look at that butterfly. Isn't he cool?" And his friend goes, "Dad, how dare you call that butterfly a he? You have no idea how he identifies." And so even kids now are like, "This is fucking ridiculous. Come on, man."
No, that's great. So that butterfly story reveals two important things. One is that most people are not crazy, and that's true at every age. Most people in a university are not crazy, are not extreme. What's happened is not that a whole generation has shifted so radically one way. What's happened is that there are small shifts, but the dynamics have changed so that people making one particular kind of argument, a kind of an activist mindset, and because the universities are on the left, so it's a left activist mindset, that is now given great deference, which means that they can win by using social intimidation. And when people win by using social intimidation, rather than making good arguments, you do more of it, and they don't learn to make better arguments. So the dynamic has changed since 2015, where people in authority are generally, you can see this, many of the college presidents seem to be afraid of their own students. There are only a few examples where they debated them. They said, "Well, I'm sure you have valid points, let's talk about it, but you've attacked members of my staff unfairly." And so that was actually the president of Oberlin, which is one of the most far left schools, the president of Oberlin actually questioned some of their hypotheses, and the students just sort of went away. He said, if you give me an ultimatum, my answer is no. I'm always here to talk to you about it, but I won't say yes to any ultimatum. So there's been very little leadership. So
where did these ideas originate from? I mean, Jordan Peterson isolates it to the Women's Studies Department in Yale in the 70s and 80s. I mean, who are these activists in universities, quote unquote, poisoning our youth's brain?
Can we also back up just to connect it to the righteous mind? Because I think what's really important here to understand is, these intuitions of care and harm, right? Which are balanced with other considerations and other moral intuitions, can be very helpful, right? But when you're only focused on the care harm intuition and focused only, and then maybe some fairness, as Bryan said.
Well, you're leaving out sanctity. You're leaving out all these other the three other sort of moral considerations on the moral taste palette, I suppose, is
right. Well, that's right. So Aristotle said any virtue carried to extremes becomes a vice. And if there are 5 or 6, or there's actually 7 or 8, there's a whole bunch of moral foundations. But if you take any one and you say, this is it, this is the only thing that matters, and we will trample on fairness, we'll trample on anything to protect this class of victims, it becomes a religion, it becomes extremist, and it commits a lot of moral violations. So I think that's part of what's going on. From the perspective of moral psychology, I think that's part of what's going on. I think Bryan's question was more historically, where did this come from? And there's a confluence of a lot of threads coming together. So we have an increasingly therapeutic culture. That's a big part of it. The most important idea in the whole book is antifragility. It is that like our immune systems have to be exposed to pathogens in order to grow. If you overprotect a kid's immune system, you're crippling the system. And we began to apply that to the whole child, that we have to protect kids from being teased, protect them from falling down, protect them from ever getting lost. Kids need to get teased, fall down, and get lost many, many times in order to be able to handle themselves and deal with it. So an increasingly therapeutic culture began to see kids as increasingly fragile, increasingly in need of adult help, increasingly in need to get in touch with their feelings. This is part of the ridiculousness about gender. Boys and girls are different, men and women are different. And, granted, there's not just 2 buckets. There are people who are not binary, but there is masculinity, there is femininity. But in the psychological language, a more feminine view tends to predominate. And that is that masculinity is toxic. Boys need to get more in touch with their feelings, etc. So you have ideas coming out of a therapeutic tradition that gets much stronger in the 70s and 80s is when it begins in America. You have rising political polarization. So we really began to hate each other in the late 90s and especially in the early 2000s. So a lot of the ideas have been there for a while. I think if you want to point to the gender studies department, that would be the greatest concentration of this worldview, that everything is power structures. When you start hearing people talk about power structures, that's usually the sign that they think in this way. Now, of course, power structures are real. I'm not saying you should never think this way, but when I travel around, I find a lot of students who everything is power structures, and you can't get them off that. And it's sort of, let me try this. This is like, okay, let me try. I'm a terrible comedian, and I'm sort of giving away that this is a joke, but suppose I were to do a routine like this. Yeah, I had the weirdest week. I visited 5 schools in 1 week. And at the first school, all the professors were Freudians. And all the students thought that like everything was sex. Like whatever you say, oh, well, that's just because you want to kill your father and sleep with your mother. It's like, really, everything is sex? Like sex matters, but it's not everything. So I kind of thought like, wow, these kids wasted their money. What a bad education. And then on Tuesday, I went to another university, and all the professors were economists. And all the students learned that everything is money. People do everything to make more money. And I said, well, money matters, but like, it's not everything. What a bad education they got there. And then on Wednesday, I went to another university, and they were all psychotherapists who believe that, well, everything is for self-esteem, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see, on Thursday, where should we go? What would be good for Thursday?
So far, it's a good Woody Allen joke. Keep going.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously, this joke still needs work. But on Friday, yeah. On Friday, I went to this university where everything was power structures, and whatever you said, it was just power and privilege, defending your privilege. And like, well, okay, power structures are real, but it's not everything. And if you come to see everything through the lens of power structures, you cannot understand the world. You're fitting into a Procrustean bed. You're chopping off the legs. It's horrible.
It's binary. It's good guys versus bad guys.
That's right. That's right. Life is non-binary.
No, it's the simplicity of, that's exactly right. They argue for the fact that gender is non-binary, but their arguments are incredibly binary.
Wow, you guys are good. I got to write this down. You guys have all these, you should go into branding work or something. Like, you got a lot of really good.
We will. Watch Complicated Apes. It was. I should have thanked you. I might have actually. I don't even know if I did.
But also, I mean, it goes back to what you were talking as well about the parsimony of academics, right? Academics love a single variable explanation, right?
The bad ones. Yeah, not
the bad ones.
There are some that love a single variable explanation. Yeah.
Well, this is something, I mean, the whole reason why we do mixed mental arts is because this is something we've seen routinely across disciplines. In nutrition science, it's the same thing. Sugar, it's the problem with sugar, So it doesn't really matter what discipline you look at, but there are a lot of bad academics, bad thinkers, bad nutrition scientists, bad economists. They all promote single variable explanations because they're easy to sell, they're simple to understand, and they seem to have a lot of explanatory power. And it's only when you start to nibble at the edges that you start to see the problems of that way of thinking. And I think the irony is that it also ties into the conversation about the Greeks. There's the bad version of the Greeks, which is it was all Plato and Socrates. And then there's the reality of the Greeks, which was viewpoint diversity. So some days they would be Socratic, some days they would be Platonic, but then they'd also go be Epicurean. They'd be,
David Epstein, who wrote The Sports Gene, just wrote a book called Range, and it's not out yet, but I read it. And he does a very good job of looking at how academics, but especially students, are suffering from this cognitive entrenchment. This idea that, really when you study one discipline, you're at the bottom of a well and you can only see that sliver of the sky. You are not seeing the whole world. And one of the advantages of being out there in the real world, having to make a business work the way I do, or just whatever it is you start to realize that a lot of these academic superstars are very myopic in their point of view. They have an orthodoxy like anybody else. And it's an impossible thing to avoid. And I think that one of the things I really appreciate about the way you think is at least you are really, because you were given an orthodoxy. I mean, through your education, there were certain people that held who'd done primary research on how we think and how we behave. And, one of the things I think that your contribution was probably that you were like, well, you know what, man, that's not how the world seems to me. Something's missing. And then you started doing these experiments and started looking at a lot of other stuff. And so now we have your 3 books that I think are just outstanding. But I think that hopefully it's not true that the best ideas win the day until they win the narrative. And the narrative has to be spoken, and it has to be packaged in a way that people can really digest it. And not be threatened by it.
And also it seems like, if I recall from the happiness hypothesis, like it was your experiences sort of being really immersed in culture in India that was like super important for you to understand that there are whole other ways of viewing the world that make perfect sense, and you can enter into those cultures.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's right. It was spending 3 months in India trying to pretend I was an anthropologist, trying to understand a culture from the inside, not condemn it from the outside. That was the breakthrough that allowed me, when I came back to the United States in December of 1993, allowed me for the first time to understand Christian conservatives. At the time it was the
moral
majority, and there was the cultural war between left and right was really taking on that flavor of religion, and it really helped. And so I think this is, so I know I have to go about 10 minutes. So but I think we can kind of bring things to a possibly exciting kind of point here by saying this. There's a really great TEDx talk by Tyler Cowen, the really interesting economist at George Mason, and it's called The Danger of Stories. And he says, there's these story narratives that grip our minds, and then we can't think straight. And he's got this great line. He says something like, anytime you embrace a good evil story, you lower your IQ by 10 points. So whatever it is you're thinking about, just start thinking of it in terms of power structures or good evil or God versus the devil. And you will find your intelligence getting dimmer. You can't think as well. Your scope is narrowed. Your conceptual toolkit is narrowed. And so if we think this way, well, then how can you get smarter? The best way to get smarter is to expose yourself to critics. And one thing that I've discovered, in general, I'm very negative about the effects of social media, but I've discovered a great thing about Twitter, which is if you put an idea out there, people will critique it right away. Like within 5 minutes, you'll get people saying why you're wrong. And it often hurts to read. But if you force yourself to do it, you actually get smarter. You see where there were holes or places that were just misunderstood. And so if you want to get dumber, join a team that has orthodoxy and silence your critics with shame. And that's a recipe for your whole group getting dumber. And if you want to get smarter, seek out critics, seek out environments in which you will engage with people. Ideally, places with norms of civility rather than social media. But other people, if you ask them to make you smarter, they actually will. And so to go with what Hunter was saying about narrowed focus, or was it bottom of the well?
No, that was Bryan.
That's my...
Bryan, okay. But if we think about either an academic world or a human world in which people get sort of narrower in their explanatory frameworks, and then you multiply that by rising political polarization, so that there's more and more need to destroy the other side. Well, now everyone goes from being like a broad light detector, like taking in stuff from all over. People go into becoming, like a laser beam or a cannon. Like I have one tube and I'm going to shoot you with. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm mixing all kinds of metaphors. I wanted to get that image of being at the bottom.
I stole that from Václav Schmel, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
So don't worry, it's not mine. I may be getting it wrong too. So
well,
we're all good.
the other.
Well, anyway, but that's a good.
Yeah, and I think the other one that I really always appreciate as well is the story of the blind men and the elephant, which is really that is so spot on for where cultures tend to go. And I think that's the problem is that, we're now in a time, especially with social media, where the people who peddle the simplest narratives have been able to get the most attention.
However, podcasting and long-form discussions like this are being heard by a lot of people. Yeah. And I mean, look at Rogan and your thing. And so these ideas make sense. They are for everybody. I think you do a great job of making them digestible. And it's always fun to talk to you, man. We don't want to take up too much of your time, but what a blast. What a blast.
No, it's really fun to talk to you guys. Let me just close with a little appreciation of comedians. So, I've been thinking, back to what you were saying about your joke routine about stereotypes. And, on campus, we're all so afraid of talking about race and gender, and we're walking on landmines. And I was thinking, you know what? Every university should require that every incoming freshman, every incoming student should have to prove that you have spent 12 hours in a comedy club before you can be allowed on campus. And the reason is because if you do that first, you will have spent 12 hours watching comedians who are black and white, male and female, gay and straight, everything else, making jokes about black and white, male and female, gay and straight, and everything else, and having fun with it, and people laughing.
That's exactly right.
And if you could do that for 12 hours, now you could actually, be in a classroom and not jump down someone's throat or be afraid someone will jump down yours if you say a word that you didn't know is no longer permitted.
That's right. And I want to close with just give us advice on how to change somebody's mind. You've got to appeal to their elephant. Can you just very quickly, if you're trying to change somebody's mind or at least get them to see your perspective, rather than try to debate and crush them with your reason and your ideas, which is how I grew up, can you give us a very quick the Cliff Notes on how to do it otherwise?
Sure. Yeah. So the Cliff Notes, let me see if I can make it up now. I guess it would be listen. I'll say it first, then we'll see if we can boil it down to 3 or 4 words. First, you've got to get them talking. You got to listen because you have to figure out what are their most sacred values. What are their moral foundations? Step 1. Step 2, you have to say something that conveys the idea that you respect their moral foundations and you can acknowledge that they or their team is right about something. And if you do that, that has magical effects. You're showing that you're not just there playing attorney, playing, warrior to kill them. You actually are open-minded enough to acknowledge that they're right about something. And only once you've done that, might it be time for you to actually now begin to try to justify some policy in terms that they might recognize or connected to their moral foundations. So when I've said this sort of thing to audiences, many people on the left, like, they cannot find anything to praise about Donald Trump. And so I've suggested, well, a lot of economists think that he was actually right to stand up to China. Like, China has really been cheating for 20 years now, and it's really warped the world economy. And if you could even just do that, if you can even just say, as much as my side hates President Trump, I got to admit, he was right on this one thing. And if you can just do that, you will find the person on the other side is much more receptive than if you just come in there. He's racist. I think he's all those things. I do not like this president, but he's not wrong about everything. And if you can say that, so I guess that would be listen, diagnose their moral foundations, acknowledge something good about their side, and then make some sort of an argument about what you want. And if you can, link it to their foundations. If you do that, that's how you speak to the elephant and actually get them leaning towards you and willing to listen to a different way of thinking.
If you're talking about conservative about the environment, use words like sacred and sanctity and respect
and national greatness. If we want to make this country great, we've got all these threats. You could have national greatness. You could talk about stewardship. Conservative virtues are about conserving what we have. So there are all kinds of ways to appeal to conservative moral foundations about the environment. And in fact, conservatives and liberals were not so far apart before 2006. The left was always more concerned about global warming, but both sides were increasing their concern about it until around 2006, when the issue got even more politicized. And at that point, the left goes up in its concern, the right goes down.
Well, I'm optimistic, and I think.
There are a couple of things that I want to throw in. One, on the comedy thing, one thing that I've always thought about a lot is that the Buddha is often laughing, because laughter shatters our expectations and shatters our view of the world. And
Oh, interesting. The Dalai Lama is always laughing too. That's a very interesting observation.
And
you learn when you do this podcast.
What I would love to see is some sort of collaboration between Jon Haidt and all the great stand-up comedians out there.
I know them all. They're all friends of mine. We'll see what happens. Jonathan Haidt, thank you for your time, man. This is such a really appreciate it.
No, this was so much fun to talk with you guys, and I rarely take so many notes when I talk to comedians.
Well, you got to come. I'll send you a copy of a special. I think you'll like it because you had a lot to do with it. So,
I'd love to see it.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Okay.
See you later, guys. Jonathan Haidt.
The legend.
Yes.